The crimson sky of Gordhak burned with an unholy light as War Chief Throgner stood atop the obsidian tower of the High Council, watching his world die. The asteroid, a mountain of ice and stone larger than their greatest city, had been spotted 3 days ago by the Skywatchers. 3 days to prepare for the end of everything they had ever known. Below him, the great forges of his people worked without cease, their hammers ringing out a funeral dirge for civilization. Sparks flew like dying stars as the last of the Orc smiths poured every ounce of their skill and knowledge into the most desperate project their race had ever undertaken, a teleportation gateway that might save some fragment of their people. War Chief, growled Morgoth, his most trusted advisor, climbing the spiral staircase that wound around the tower's exterior. The old Orc's battle-scarred face was grim, his tusks yellowed with age and worry. The calculations are complete. The gateway can transport perhaps 500 of our people, no more. The energy requirements. How many souls dwell on Gordhak? Throgner interrupted, his deep voice carried away by the hot wind that swept across the dying world. 12 million, my lord. Throgner's massive hands tightened on the stone battlements until his knuckles cracked. He was 7 feet of corded muscle and scar tissue, a warrior born and bred, but no amount of strength could fight the inexorable approach of cosmic annihilation. His green skin, typical of his mountain clan, seemed to absorb the hellish light that now bathed their world. Then we choose 500 to carry on the blood of our ancestors, he said finally. The strongest. The smartest. The young who can rebuild what we are about to lose. The ground beneath them shuddered as seismic waves rippled outward from the impact zones where smaller debris had already begun to rain down. In the distance, a pillar of fire and smoke rose from what had once been the fertile river valley of Kazakh. The asteroid fragments were merely harbingers. The true destroyer still fell toward them, growing larger in the sky with each passing hour. Morgoth handed him a stone tablet inscribed with cramped runes. The selection list, as you commanded. Warriors from the Blood Fang, Iron Skull, and Stormtooth clans. The finest smiths and engineers. Scholars who know our history and traditions. And... he hesitated. Speak. Your daughter, Gracia. She refuses to take a place unless her hunting pack comes with her. All 6 of them. Throgner's laugh was bitter as grinding stone. Gracia was barely past her naming ceremony, only 17 winters old, but already she commanded more respect among the younger Orcs than many of his war chiefs. She had inherited her mother's tactical brilliance and his own stubborn pride, a dangerous combination. Of course she does. Where is she now? Leading a raid on the archive vaults. She says if we're abandoning our world, we need to take our knowledge with us. Books, scrolls, anything that can be carried. Another tremor shook the tower, this one strong enough to send loose stones tumbling from the battlements. Far below, Throgner could see streams of Orcs moving through the streets like rivers of green and brown, some carrying precious belongings, others bearing the materials needed for the great work in the foundries. They moved with purpose despite their doom. Orcs did not break easily. How long until the gateway is ready? 6 hours, perhaps 7. The artificers are pushing the resonance crystals beyond their safe limits. If they overload, then we die here instead of somewhere else. Throgner finished. Not much of a choice, is it? The war chief turned away from the apocalyptic vista and began descending the tower. There was much to do and little time to do it. The selection of 500 souls from 12 million was only the beginning. They needed provisions, weapons, tools, and supplies for whatever world awaited them on the other side of the gateway. If, indeed, any world awaited them at all. The teleportation arrays were ancient magic, older than the current age of Orc civilization. The formulae had been discovered in ruins left by their predecessors, a race whose name was lost to time, who had built wonders and then vanished, leaving only scattered fragments of their knowledge. The Orc scholars had spent centuries trying to decode their secrets, and only now, at the end of all things, had they finally understood enough to attempt such a massive transportation. But they were essentially throwing 500 lives into the void, hoping something habitable lay on the other side. The targeting was largely guesswork based on stellar observations and half-understood mathematical principles. They might emerge above a star and be instantly incinerated. They might find themselves in the vacuum of space. Or they might discover a world so hostile that a quick death from the asteroid would have been a mercy. As Throgner made his way through the corridors of the tower, past chambers where scribes worked frantically to preserve what knowledge they could on portable storage crystals, he encountered Gracia returning from her raid on the archives. She stood nearly as tall as he did, unusual for an orc female, with the lean build of a hunter rather than the bulk of a warrior. Her dark hair was bound in the complex braids of her clan, decorated with small bones and metal rings that clinked softly as she moved. "Father," she said, inclining her head slightly. In her arms she carried a bundle of ancient texts wrapped in oiled leather. "I've gathered what I could. The Chronicle of Kings, the Engineering Codex, the forged songs of the Master Smiths. If we're to rebuild, we need to remember who we are." "And your pack?" "They've agreed to the selection. We'll carry additional gear and supplies instead of personal effects." Her eyes, the color of amber shot through with gold, met his steadily. "We're young. We can make new memories. But these books—" She lifted the bundle. "These are irreplaceable." Throgner felt a surge of pride bittersweet in the face of their circumstances. His daughter understood what needed to be done. The others selected for transport were warriors and workers, chosen for their ability to survive and build. But survival without culture was just an extended form of dying. "The gateway will be ready soon," he told her. "Gather your pack and make ready. And Gracia." He reached out to touch her shoulder. "Whatever world we find, stay close to me in those first moments. We don't know what we'll face." She nodded, then paused as another tremor ran through the tower, stronger than before. Through the narrow windows, they could see the death light growing brighter in the sky. The asteroid was close enough now that its gravitational influence was affecting Gordhak's rotation, causing unprecedented seismic activity. "Will it hurt?" Gracia asked quietly. "For those who stay behind?" Throgner looked out at his dying world and considered lying to her. But orcs value truth above comfort, even when that truth was harsh. "At the end, it will be very quick," he said. "The impact will crack the planet's crust. The atmosphere will be blown away. For most, death will come before they even realize what's happening." "Good," she said simply, and he knew she was thinking of her friends and teachers and all the orcs who would never see another dawn. A quick death was the last mercy their world could offer. The great chamber beneath the city thrummed with barely contained power. Massive crystals, each one the size of an orc warrior, had been arranged in a perfect circle around the teleportation platform. They glowed with an inner light that hurt to look at directly, resonating with harmonics that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of anyone who drew near. Around the perimeter of the chamber, the 500 chosen stood in organized ranks. Each carried a pack loaded with essentials, tools, seeds, medical supplies, and precious materials that might be impossible to find on an alien world. The warriors bore their finest weapons, the craftsmen their most valued instruments, the scholars their most important texts. Throgner surveyed them with a mixture of pride and grief. These were the finest of his people, the inheritors of a civilization that stretched back 10,000 years. On their shoulders rested the responsibility of ensuring that something of the orcs would survive beyond this day. The engineering teams made final adjustments to the resonance crystals, their faces tight with concentration. Master Engineer Vrag, his tusks inscribed with the technical diagrams he'd spent his life memorizing, approached the war chief with an expression of grim satisfaction. "The array is as ready as we can make it, my lord," he reported. "The targeting coordinates are locked in. We're aiming for the third planet of a star our astronomers designated as Keeper's Light. Spectral analysis suggests it has an atmosphere and liquid water. Beyond that," he shrugged with typical orc pragmatism. "And the power requirements? We've routed energy from every remaining fusion reactor on Gordhak. The drain will be enormous, enough to power our entire civilization for a month, discharged in a matter of seconds. The crystals may not survive the process, which means no return trip. This is a one-way journey." Throgner nodded. They had always known this would be final. Even if the gateway survived, there would be no Gordhack to return to. The asteroid was now visible as a dark blot against the crimson sky, occluding stars as it fell toward them. Across the chamber, Gracia stood with her hunting pack, 6 young orcs who had trained together since childhood. There was Krogar, massive even by orc standards, who could track a ghost through solid rock. Next, slight and quick, whose skill with bow and blade was already the stuff of legend. The twins Uras and Uruk, who seemed to share a single mind in battle. Helka, the only other female in the group, who knew more about surviving in the wilderness than orcs twice her age. And quiet Zethus, whose talent for understanding and repairing complex mechanisms might prove invaluable in their new world. They looked calm, even eager. Youth and inexperience could be a blessing sometimes. They were too young to fully grasp the magnitude of what they were leaving behind. A deep rumble rolled through the chamber as another seismic shock wave passed beneath them. Dust rained from the ceiling, and several of the selected orcs looked up nervously. Time was running out. "Master Engineer," Throgner called. "Begin the activation sequence." Vrag moved to the control console, a complex array of switches, levers, and monitoring crystals that regulated the flow of energy through the gateway. Around the chamber, his assistants took their positions at secondary control stations. The hum of power began to deepen, dropping into frequencies that were felt rather than heard. "Phase 1, power buildup," Bragg announced. The resonance crystals began to glow brighter, their light shifting from pale blue to brilliant white. Energy flow at 20% and climbing. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with potential. Several of the orcs rubbed their arms as their fur stood on end, responding to the massive electromagnetic fields being generated. The platform at the center of the crystal circle began to emit a low, harmonious tone. 30%. 40%. The crystals were blazing now, so bright that many of the orcs had to shield their eyes. The harmonic resonance was building, creating complex interference patterns that made reality itself seem to shimmer and blur at the edges. 50%. We're approaching the threshold. Suddenly, one of the monitoring stations erupted in sparks. An assistant engineer cried out as electricity arced across his console, but he maintained his position, adjusting controls with hands that smoked from minor burns. "Crystal 7 is overloading," he shouted over the rising whine of stress systems. "Resonance frequency is drifting outside acceptable parameters. Compensate with crystals 4 and 11. Vrag barked back. "Reduce their output by 8%. Another tremor shook the chamber, this one violent enough to throw several orcs to their knees. The asteroid was close now, close enough that its gravitational field was beginning to distort Gordhack's crust. They had minutes, perhaps less. 60%. 70%. The light from the crystals was becoming impossible to look at directly. The air crackled with static electricity, and the metallic taste of ozone filled everyone's mouths. Initiating spatial distortion field. The platform at the center of the chamber began to change. Reality seemed to fold in on itself, creating a shimmering, unstable area where perspective became fluid and confusing. Through the distortion, glimpses of something else became visible, flashes of alien sky, foreign terrain, the hint of an entirely different world. 80%. 90%. Vrag's voice was strained now, shouting to be heard over the screaming harmonics. "Spatial tunnel is stabilizing. We have target lock. Begin transport," Throgner commanded. The first group of orcs, 20 warriors from the Blood Fawn clan, stepped onto the platform. For a moment they stood there, solid and real, and then the light enveloped them. There was a sound like reality tearing, a flash that burned afterimages into the retinas of everyone watching, and they were gone. "Transport successful," one of the monitoring engineers called out. "Life signs detected on the other side." The second group moved forward, then the third. The process was working, but each transport was pushing the overtaxed system closer to catastrophic failure. Warning lights flashed red across all the control stations, and the smell of burning electronics filled the air. Gracia and her pack were in the 8th group to be transported. As they stepped onto the platform, Throgner caught his daughter's eyes one last time. She nodded to him, not a goodbye, but an acknowledgement of duty. Then the light claimed them. The chamber shook again, this time so violently that cracks appeared in the ceiling. Through the cavern's upper vents, they could see the sky glowing white-hot. The asteroid was beginning to enter the atmosphere, friction heating it to temperatures that would melt steel. "Hurry!" Throgner roared. "We're out of time!" Group after group vanished through the gateway. The engineers worked their stations despite electrical fires and failing systems, their dedication absolute. They knew they would not be among the saved. Their job was to ensure that others survived. Finally, only the last group remained, Throgner himself and 24 of his most trusted advisors and war chiefs. They were the leaders, the last to leave their doomed world. As they stepped onto the platform, Master Engineer Vrag gave him a final salute. "May the ancestors watch over you, War Chief!" The light rose around them, reality blurred and twisted, and the last thing Throgner saw of his homeworld was Vrag's determined face as the ancient Orc held his failing systems together through sheer force of will. Then Gordhak was gone, and they were falling through space and time toward an unknown fate. The first thing Throgner noticed was the smell. It hit him like a physical blow as he materialized on the alien platform, a thick, cloying scent that combined rotting vegetation with something sharply chemical, like acid mixed with decay. The air was humid and oppressive, heavy with moisture that clung to his skin like an unwelcome caress. The second thing he noticed was the sound, a constant chittering, clicking noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off unseen surfaces in the dim, filtered light. As his vision cleared from the disorientation of teleportation, Throgner found himself standing on what appeared to be a circular platform made of some kind of resinous material, dark and slightly flexible under his feet. It was situated in a clearing surrounded by massive trees, or what he at first took to be trees. But trees didn't have segmented trunks that gleamed with chitinous hardness. Trees didn't have joints where their branches connected to their trunks. And trees definitely didn't have clusters of multifaceted eyes staring down at him from their upper reaches. "By the ancestors' blood!" Morgoth whispered beside him, and Throgner realized with relief that his old friend had also made the transition safely. Around them, the other members of the final transport group were materializing, their faces showing the same mixture of relief and growing horror as they took in their surroundings. The clearing was perhaps 100 meters across, enclosed on all sides by the towering arthropod structures. Each one stood at least 30 meters tall, their bodies a glossy black-brown that reflected the sickly green light filtering down from above. They had 8 legs, or perhaps they were arms, that ended in delicate manipulator appendages capable of fine work. Their heads, if they could be called heads, were triangular clusters of sensory organs, dozens of eyes of varying sizes, twitching antennae, and mandibles that clicked constantly in what might have been communication. And they were definitely aware of the newcomers. "Weapons ready!" Throgner ordered quietly, drawing his massive vorax from its harness across his back. The blade gleamed with the dark metal of Gordhak's forges, inscribed with runes of sharpness and durability that would serve him well in the coming fight. Around him, his war chiefs followed suit, preparing for battle with the smooth efficiency of lifelong warriors. "War Chief," one of his scouts called from the edge of the platform. "There are others here. The earlier transport groups, they're alive, but—" Throgner moved to where the scout was pointing. Through the web of arthropod legs that surrounded their clearing, he could see other platforms similar to the one they stood on. Orcs were visible on several of them, but they were not moving freely. Instead, they appeared to be wrapped in some kind of glistening cocoons, suspended from the structures above by thick cables of what could only be webbing. His stomach clenched as he realized what he was seeing. They had transported his people into the middle of a giant spider colony. The enormous arthropods surrounding them were not trees at all, but the inhabitants of this world, and they had already begun treating the arriving orcs as prey. A movement above caught his attention. Something was descending from the canopy on a strand of silk, but this was no ordinary spider. It was roughly humanoid in shape but covered in the same chitinous exoskeleton as the larger creatures. It had 4 arms ending in clawed hands, and its head was a nightmare fusion of human and arachnid features, a face that might once have been human, but with mandibles where the mouth should be and a cluster of 8 eyes where 2 should have been. It landed gracefully on the platform 20 meters away, its claws clicking against the resinous surface. When it spoke, its voice was a strange harmony of tones, as if multiple vocal cords were vibrating at once. "Welcome, warm bloods, to the domain of the web builders," it said in accented but recognizable Orcish. "I am Speaker of Depths, chosen to interface with your kind. You have arrived at a most fortuitous time. The breeding season approaches, and we have great need of protein-rich nutrients for our developing young." Throgner stepped forward, his war axe held ready but not yet raised in obvious threat. "I am Warchief Throgner of the mountain clans of Gordhak. We seek sanctuary and the right to settle peacefully. We have no quarrel with your people." The creature that called itself Speaker of Depths tilted its head in what might have been amusement. "Peaceful settlement? Fascinating. Your companions struggled quite energetically when the Hunt Sisters began their work. Very entertaining to watch, though ultimately futile. Release them," Throgner growled, his patience already wearing thin. "Return our people, and we will discuss terms." "Terms?" The speaker's mandibles clicked rapidly, perhaps laughter. "You misunderstand your situation, Warmblood. You are not conquerors or negotiators. You are food. Your soft flesh will nourish our hatchlings, your bones will strengthen our web anchors, and your strange metal tools will make interesting decorations for our dwelling spheres." That was enough. Throgner raised his war axe and let out the traditional war cry of his clan, a sound that had terrified enemies across a dozen battlefields. Around him, his warriors took up the cry, their voices joining in a harmony of rage and defiance that echoed off the arthropod structures. The effect on the spiders was immediate. The clicking sounds from the surrounding creatures rose to a fever pitch, and dozens of the humanoid forms began descending from above on silk lines. But Throgner was already moving, his war axe describing a gleaming arc as he charged at Speaker of Depths. The creature was fast, faster than anything that size had a right to be. It leaped backward, avoiding his initial strike, and lashed out with 2 of its clawed arms. Throgner barely managed to interpose his axe handle, the impact sending shock waves up his arms. These things were strong as well as quick. Around him, battle was joined as more spider creatures swarmed down from the structures above. His war chiefs formed a defensive circle, their weapons carving deadly arcs through the humid air. Morgatha's twin blades flashed like silver lightning, cutting through chitinous limbs with wet snapping sounds. The younger warriors roared their clan songs as they fought, filling the air with the ancient music of orc warfare. But for every spider they cut down, 2 more seemed to take its place. And Throgner was beginning to realize the true scope of their problem as he dodged another swipe from Speaker of Depth's claws. This wasn't just a colony, it was a city. The structures around them extended in all directions as far as he could see, and each one housed dozens or hundreds of the creatures. They had teleported into the heart of a civilization that viewed them as food. A sharp pain lanced through his shoulder as one of the creature's claws found its mark, tearing through his armor and the flesh beneath. Green Orcish blood ran down his arm, but he ignored the wound and pressed his attack. His war axe connected with the speaker's torso, biting deep into the chitinous shell and spraying yellowish ichor. The creature screamed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with steam escaping from a boiler. It staggered backward, 3 of its 4 arms clutching at the wound, while the 4th still tried to fend off Throgner's follow-up strikes. "You cannot win," it gasped between gurgling breaths. "Even if you defeat the Hunt Sisters, even if you destroy this entire colony node, there are thousands more across the weblands. You are few, we are legion. Then we'll die fighting," Throgner snarled, raising his axe for the killing blow. "That's what orcs do." But before he could strike, a new sound cut through the battle, the horn call of an orc ranger, blown in the pattern that meant, "Rally to me." The sound came from somewhere beyond the immediate fighting, and Throgner felt a surge of hope. Some of his people were free and fighting back. He buried his axe in Speaker of Depth's skull, cutting off the creature's final words, then turned to his warriors. "Form up! We break through to our people!" The war chiefs didn't hesitate. They shifted their formation into a wedge, with the heavily armored warriors at the point and the more lightly equipped scouts protecting the flanks. Together they began to cut their way through the swarm of spider creatures, leaving a trail of yellow ichor and severed limbs in their wake. As they fought clear of the immediate platform area, Throgner got his first good look at the true scope of the spider city. The structures extended in all directions, some reaching hundreds of meters into the air, others descending into vast underground chambers visible through gaps in the resinous flooring. Bridges of webbing connected the various levels, creating a three-dimensional maze of passages and chambers. And everywhere, thousands upon thousands of the spider creatures scuttled about their business, tending to egg sacs the size of orc dwellings, weaving silk into complex patterns, and now converging on the areas where the transported orcs had appeared. But the horn call came again, closer now, and Throgner could see movement in one of the nearby structures. A group of orcs had barricaded themselves into what appeared to be a storage chamber, and were fighting desperately to hold their position. He could see Grasha's distinctive silhouette among them, her hunting pack formed up around her in a defensive formation. "There!" he roared, pointing with his blood-stained axe. "Our young ones need us!" The charge that followed would be remembered in orc songs for generations to come, if any survived to sing them. 25 orc warriors, the finest of a dying civilization, carved their way through an army of nightmares to reach their trapped comrades. They moved like a force of nature, their weapons flickering faster than the eye could follow, their war cries drowning out even the chittering of their enemies. But with each step, more spiders poured in from the surrounding structures. For every one they killed, 3 more took its place. And slowly, inevitably, the circle around them began to tighten. Grasha had realized they were in trouble the moment she materialized on the platform and breathed air that tasted of acid and death. Unlike her father's group, hers had appeared in what seemed to be some kind of nursery chamber. The walls were lined with thousands of egg sacs, each one pulsing with internal movement, and the floor was sticky with the residue of hatching fluid. The spider creatures guarding the nursery had been as surprised by their sudden appearance as the orcs were by their hostile environment. That surprise had bought them precious seconds, enough time for Krogar to smash through a cluster of egg sacs with his warhammer, and for Nex to put 3 arrows into the nearest spider before it could raise an alarm. But the advantage of surprise never lasted long. Now, 6 hours after their arrival, Grasha and her pack had fought their way through 12 different chambers, always moving upward, always seeking higher ground and better defensive positions. They had rescued what survivors they could find from the earlier transport groups, orcs who had been partially wrapped in webbing but not yet drained of their life fluids. Their current position was a storage chamber about 50 meters up in one of the medium-sized structures. The entrance was narrow enough that the spiders could only come at them a few at a time, and the chamber itself was filled with what appeared to be preserved food supplies, various unidentifiable creatures suspended in amber-colored resin. Not exactly appetizing, but potentially edible if their situation became desperate enough. Zethus had managed to jury-rig a barricade across the entrance using parts salvaged from destroyed spider equipment, creating a barrier with firing ports that allowed the archers to shoot while remaining protected. It was good work, but Grasha knew it wouldn't hold forever. The spiders were methodical and patient. They could afford to wait while more and more of their kind surrounded the structure. "How many arrows do you have left?" she asked Nex, who was crouched by one of the firing ports, methodically placing shots into any spider that showed itself. 37. The lean orc replied without taking his eye from his sight line. "I've been recovering what I can from fallen enemies, but their chitin is hard. Most of my arrowheads are damaged after one shot." Helka looked up from where she was tending to the wounds of a rescued warrior. "We've got 14 fighters who can still hold weapons, plus 6 wounded who can contribute if things get desperate. That's not many against." She gestured vaguely toward the sounds of chittering that seemed to come from every direction. "Against an entire city," Grasha finished. "I know." She moved to one of the chamber's transparent wall sections, some kind of hardened resin that provided a view of the surrounding area. What she saw was not encouraging. The spider structures stretched to the horizon in every direction, a metropolis of organic architecture that dwarfed anything the orcs had ever built. And all of it was crawling with hostile life. But there was something else. In the distance, perhaps a kilometer away, she could see signs of fighting, flashes of metal, the distinctive glow of burning structures, and the occasional glimpse of green-skinned figures moving in coordinated formation. "Father's group," she said quietly. "They're still alive and fighting." Yuras, one of the twins, joined her at the observation post. "Can we reach them?" "Not directly. There's too much open ground between here and there. We'd be swarmed before we made it halfway." Gracia studied the layout of the Spider City, her mind racing through tactical possibilities. "But if we could create a distraction, draw some of the defenders away." "What kind of distraction?" asked Yurok, the other twin. Gracia pointed to a cluster of large egg chambers visible through the transparent wall. "Those are nurseries. Probably containing the next generation of spiders. If something were to happen to them." "You want to attack their young?" Helka sounded shocked. Among orcs, harming children, even enemy children, was considered deeply dishonorable. "I want to give them something more important to worry about than hunting us," Gracia replied. "Look at the size of those chambers. Each one probably holds thousands of eggs. If they caught fire, or if someone triggered a structural collapse, the entire colony would mobilize to save them," Krogar said, understanding immediately. "It would pull defenders away from the structures between us and the Warchief's position." "Exactly. And while they're fighting fires and rescuing eggs, we fight our way through the chaos to rejoin the main group." Zethus looked up from where he was reinforcing their barricade. "It could work, but we need to split our forces. Someone would have to stay here to create the distraction, while others make the run to rejoin the war chief." "No," Gracia said firmly. "We all go together, or we don't go at all. I'm not leaving anyone behind." "Then how do we trigger the distraction remotely?" Nex asked. Gracia smiled, an expression that would have been familiar to anyone who knew her father. It was the smile of an orc who had found a particularly clever way to cause massive destruction. "Zethus, those preserved food stores, what do you think they're suspended in?" The mechanically minded orc moved to examine one of the storage containers more closely. "Some kind of resin, like tree sap but more refined. It's highly flammable. I can smell the hydrocarbons from here. And this entire structure is made of similar materials." "Krogar, remember that acid we found in the lower chambers? The stuff the spiders use to dissolve their prey?" The massive warrior nodded slowly. "You want to mix acid and flammable resin. I want to turn this entire storage facility into a bomb," Gracia corrected. "We rig it to explode about 10 minutes after we leave, aim the blast toward those nursery chambers, and hope the resulting fire spreads far enough to create the chaos we need." "That's..." Helka paused, considering. "That's actually brilliant. Destructive and probably suicidal, but brilliant. Probably suicidal is better odds than we've had all day," Yuras pointed out pragmatically. The plan, once conceived, was relatively simple to execute. Zethus and Krogar worked together to break open several dozen of the food storage containers, spreading the flammable resin across the floor of the chamber. Meanwhile, Nex and the twins used salvaged spider equipment to create a crude delivery system for the acid they had collected earlier. The timing mechanism was the most complex part. Zethus rigged a simple fuse using materials from their equipment packs. Orc gear was designed to be robust and adaptable, and a clever engineer could make almost anything from basic components if he was willing to think creatively and ignore normal safety protocols. While the technical team worked on their improvised explosives, Gracia and Helka planned their route through the Spider City. The structures were connected by bridges and walkways, creating multiple paths between any 2 points. The trick was choosing a route that would provide cover from above while avoiding obvious choke points where they could be easily trapped. "Here," Helka said, pointing to a section of the city that seemed less densely populated. "These look like industrial structures, probably fewer defenders, and the larger spaces give us room to maneuver." "Agreed. We'll move fast and light, carrying only essential gear. If we get separated..." Gracia looked around at her pack, these orcs who had followed her through 6 hours of continuous combat without question or hesitation. "If we get separated, Everyone makes for the warship's position independently. Don't stop to help anyone who falls behind, that's an order. And if the warship's position has been overrun? Nex asked quietly. Then we find the highest point in the city and make our last stand there. Let these things know what it costs to hunt orcs. The preparations took another hour, during which the spider attacks on their barricade intensified. It was as if the creatures could sense that their prey was planning something. But Zethus's improvised defenses held, and finally the demolition charge was ready. 10 minutes after ignition, Zethus reported. Probably. I'm working with unfamiliar materials and making a lot of assumptions about burn rates. 10 minutes is enough, Gracia said. Everyone ready? Her pack checked their gear one final time. They had abandoned anything non-essential, keeping only weapons, a small amount of medical supplies, and the most precious cultural artifacts they had managed to preserve. If they survived this, they could worry about finding food and shelter later. Right now, survival was measured in minutes, not days. Light it, Gracia ordered. Zethus triggered the fuse mechanism, a small spark that began to crawl along a line of chemical compounds toward the main explosive mass. Then they were moving, tearing down their barricade and charging out into the spider-infested corridor beyond. The first minute was the worst. The spiders had been gathering outside their position in preparation for a major assault, and the sudden emergence of their prey caught them off guard but didn't drive them away. Gracia found herself fighting 3 of the creatures simultaneously, her twin blades weaving a pattern of death around her as she carved a path through the chitinous mass. Behind her, she could hear the distinctive sounds of her pack in combat, Krogar's warhammer crushing through carapaces, Nex's bow singing as he placed shot after shot into enemy eyes, the twins fighting in their eerie synchronization that let them anticipate each other's movements perfectly. They fought their way out of the structure and onto one of the web bridges connecting it to the industrial district. Here the going was easier. The bridge was narrow enough that they couldn't be flanked, and the spider's aerial advantage was reduced by the need to approach from directly ahead or behind. But time was running out. They were halfway across the bridge when the explosion lit up the spider city behind them.